how do East and Southeast Asian artists navigate the balance between preserving their cultural identity and appealing to a broader global audience?
It's kind of different for every artist. You know? I feel like there's some artists who I feel like are quite conscious, like someone like Bohan Phoenix, for example, in the States. He's sort of quite conscious about like making Chinese aesthetics and like rapping in Chinese, sort of making that very much part of his brand and his image. I think people like that are sort of like, you know, that's a very conscious attempt at like preserving their cultural identity while still also like working and, you know, writing in English and writing for a Western audience or even like a diaspora audience. But at the same time, I don't necessarily feel like that's the only way to go about things. And it's like, you know, the whole point of like being part of the diaspora is that like we're gonna have like an inherently different cultural identity to someone who was like brought up in China or Korea or the Philippines, whatever. So
I think for me it's interesting, but it's like I'm interested in telling queer Asian stories because I am, but also because like it's not told, and all I can really tell are my stories and my experiences. And like when people look at me as an artist, they're like, oh, like it is political what they see. Like they see my queerness and they see my Asianness. So I would rather address that in my own terms than have them put their assumptions on me. It's unfortunate that we are kind of sometimes blocked by the industry because of those things, where I just really want to tell those stories authentically.
yeah, I think that's like a major impetus for me as well, definitely. It's like kind of like taking our stories into our own hands. You know, I think like our existence being inherently politicized is something that I really had to wrestle with as a trans woman, as an ESEA person, as a mixed race person. And it's a thing where like, you know, growing up, I didn't really have that kind of representation at all. You know, I had to find it in very like disparate sources. But I think that's kind of why like I'm so adamant about like telling my own story and being as authentic to myself and my experience as possible, because it's needed really.
Yeah, and I know for a lot of artists, it is about like what you said, like connecting back with their culture and trying to find ways to understand their history more through expressing it through music, right? Like I grew up in Hong Kong, but I've lived here since I was 14.
Yeah.
So I have a very like duo perspective on, you know, being an English speaker and a Chinese speaker. So like my genres might not necessarily carry like Chinese traditional music elements, but the stories I'm telling are inherently
Right.
like Chinese.
And also, all we can do is represent ourselves authentically. Like, I wouldn't ever claim to speak for like the Chinese diaspora community or like the ESEA community or everything like that, or even a trans community. Just I can represent myself and my own experiences. And I think by having more and more people who just do that rather than representing a community, that's kind of how we get representation. Is by showing that these communities, like we're not just a monolith, we're not just one
that we're
experience.
diverse. Yeah.
There's a multiplicity of experiences, and you know that's the beauty of it.
I just feel like you can't force these like things, like force yourself to be like, oh, what kind of elements shall I get in the songs to make it more Asian, to make it more like whatnot?
Yeah, like it comes quite naturally. I
Yeah.
think like with A Doll's House, for example, like the song we're gonna do today. In like the last chorus, there's like an erhu, but like, I didn't plan for it to be that. I wasn't like, oh, I'm gonna have like an erhu in here. It's just like when I was writing it, I was like, I think we need like a sonic element, the sort of like in like the high section of it. It was very technical actually. I was like, I think like the mids and the lows are like done for, but I think we just need like an element. And I thought like an erhu would be like really pretty, and so it came up with that melody. And I sort of felt like that, like, you know, that's something that like I came up with because it's a part of my culture, but it wasn't something that I was intentionally being like, yes, I'm going to include elements of classical Chinese music in my sound. It's just something that like, well, it felt right to do at the moment, and it's something that there's someone who didn't have the same cultural heritage as me probably wouldn't have thought of to do.
Absolutely.
You know? East and Southeast Asian music and artists have been gaining even more global recognition recently. And how do you see this influence growing in the coming years, and what can be done to ensure it continues to rise?
I think what you said is like not treating Asian artists as a monolith and understanding the difference between artists and genres, and the fact that we can explore all these genres in different ways. Because I think, you know, for example, if we talk about K-pop, which is actually probably the only one that's really rising like in the commercial space, that itself, K-pop is not monolith, but everything is compared to K-pop if it's Asian.
Yeah.
And that takes away from a lot of the other Asian genres and cultures that are trying to be seen and break through.
This is like a phenomenon of like, you know, globalization, isn't it? Like, you know, you have all this like different culture kind of blends together, you know, like lots of these electronic producers trying to work with like East and Asian artists, like, you know, Alan Walker with, I don't know who he's been working with, but apparently it is like working. I guess, you know, it's doomed to happen, like, you know, Blackpink and Lady Gaga, Latto and BTS, Charlie XCX and BTS, you know, all these like Western artists trying to like collab with like that part of the world. Just, you know, you wanted to expand the market to the other side of the planet. You know, I think it's a way to, I guess, you know, reach that international market.
That's also the thing that I think there's a big like conflation among non-ESEA people of like the diaspora and then like music that's actually coming out of Korea and Japan and like the Philippines and like ESEA countries when it's like a very, very different thing. Like there's a very big difference between like black music that's coming out of America, like African American music, and then like Afro beats or bashment, which is coming out of the Caribbean.
And I think also like when you think about just like, for example, a lot of ESEA artists in the UK, a lot of people, yes, some people grew up here, but a lot of people emigrated here as well to work, and like they don't come from the same financial background, the same communities where they have people to help them, support them. Like they're at the same time building a community, trying to pay their rent, trying to do this and that, and trying to make music. So like we need to look after these artists a little more as well, because like we don't all start from the same like starting point in this race, right?
I think that like that idea of like actually looking after people in our community is really important. I think when like the industry gets involved, money gets involved. I think especially in a city like London, it's very competitive, and I think this idea that only one of us can make it, and that's just not the case.
That's not the case at all. And what I like is like to see money almost like recycled within the community.
Yeah.
Like, you know, I hire a graphic designer who then hires someone else in the same community, and we like that money stays in our economy, and it's important so we can keep like helping each other out and building. Despite the global success, East and Southeast Asian artists are still underrepresented in the music industry. What are the primary barriers to greater representation, and how can the industry address these challenges?
There are many industry gatekeepers, you know. The gatekeepers are like, you know, the live agents, the promoters, the label A&R, the playlist editor, the radio presenter, you know, the journalists, like all these people, you know. It's about like the standard of selecting musicians or even like artists based on their heritage. I mean, how many Asian Asian artists are on like the festival lineup? You know, like that's not many. I mean, I've seen Bamin Tiger on like the Great Escape and all these like lineup, but you know, it is really good to have that sort of representation, but at the same time, it's like, you know, the majority you're seeing is just like DJ, like, you know, Peggy Goo. But what about these like underground artists? You know, I was once sat at a roundtable of managers, and I was just like, it is extremely hard for an Eastern Asian artist to make it, especially in London, just because, you know, we need to try extra hard to pitch the songs, pitch like the artist profile to, you know, different industry network. And then the response I get was, it is, you know, really difficult, but if you don't have a smash hit, why would people, you know, care about it? And to me, that was just like bizarre, because like, I'm sure we have a hit, but what I meant is like the pitching process for us to even get these songs to those gatekeepers and for them to actually consider, you know, our tracks, and, you know, for not thinking about like wasting their quota on getting a song on the playlist or getting an artist on the lineup, that is like the challenge that we're facing. And I don't think people understand because of the privileged background.
It's a really weird thing where I feel like artists of our background are kind of expected to already have proved themselves before labels and like gatekeepers take any kind of interest. Whereas if like other artists, like, you know, someone might just come to one of their shows, see the potential in them, give them a like, cash injection, and, you know, like construct a kind of like, well, like, you know, the whole industry plant thing, right? Like, but we don't get that. We're kind of expected to like, having made hits without any kind of industry support, doing it all on our own, before they take any kind of interest in us. But in a way, that's kind of like, you know, one of us, like, it means that it's a strength almost, you know. We have a much harder time of being recognized by the industry and picked up by the industry. It also develops sort of like, you know, helps us be more self-sufficient earlier on. And that's something that I've definitely noticed, that a lot of ESA artists have had to be, you just had to be more self-sufficient. You've had to learn how to do everything ourselves, and that's a strength, you know. It's not great that that's what the situation is, but at least some silver linings, I guess.
I've been in rooms where people are like, oh, so like, why is your production like this and that? And I'm like, but I'm singing English and I'm making indie pop music. Like, it's not something that's so difficult to swallow deal. It's like it's quite simple. I'm using Western strophic structures. Like why does my ethnicity have to play in this apart from the story I'm telling, right?
Especially with like the intersectional aspect of it as well, when it's like there just aren't really like queer ESEA artists. Someone like
No.
Rena, I guess, who like
Yeah.
people will compare us to inevitably, even when like my music sounds nothing like Rena's.
Yeah.
You know, like it's like they want a blueprint to go off of. They want like a kind of like a template to work from, and when we don't fit that template, they're not going to pay us any attention until we've already proven ourselves and proven that it's something that works. But then by that point, we kind of don't need it anymore. So like it's a very like vicious cycle or a Ouroboros type thing.
And I think
so.
that's like people in the industry being very uncreative.
Yeah,
And,
definitely.
Which is in a way fine that artists are the creative ones, but you've got to shift some power in the dynamics, or we'll never be able to express that creativity to actually break ourselves into the industry like that.
Especially when like our sort of like the uniqueness of our identities, when we're not that unique. I know like a couple thousand like queer ESEA people, like we're here, and that's the point. It's like the fact that we are who we are, you'd think that they'd think that's like a USP, right? That's like you'd think that the industry would see our identities and the relative like uniqueness of them as like a positive, because then you can like target those communities, and because people like really are like really passionate about what I do, and a lot of it's because they've just never had that kind of representation before. That's why that's a big part of why I have the fans I do, and my fan base is so passionate. So I just don't get where it's like that's not like an obvious thing to these people in power, but
But I do feel like I need to praise some of the industry people for, supporting, the ESEA artists that's based in the UK. For example, like you created Bumper, make it really inclusive for like, people of color, like, in the industry that wanted to like show off their talents and music to like the community. And also we've got like ESEA music, like community, which is founded by Tiger and Hiroki, and I feel like we're having all these like monthly meetings. It kind of really help us to be more, collectively like supporting each other in the industry, like kind of introduce us to like the right industry networks, and also like promoter that is willing to book us on
because
festivals.
ESEA music is essentially like a union, right?
Yeah.
Like, fundamentally, it's just like a trade union. But I think the difference between like ESEA music and other trade unions is that it's also along like racial lines and community lines. And I think the very unique, specific thing about the UK's ESEA diaspora, like the British ESEA diaspora, compared to say Asian Americans, is that being Asian American is to a certain extent an established, cohesive, coherent identity.
Absolutely.
In the sense that at the very least, like Asian American culture is like kind of a thing, right? It's like literature surrounding Asian American identity exists. The term Asian American has been around for like at least like I think a couple decades, whereas like ESEA, like I was there. That was like 2019, 2020 when that term even popped
When
into
they stopped
existence.
using BAME.
Yeah, they still using BAME.
Throwback to BAME.
or like, and even how like unofficial forms it's like Asian, Chinese, or other.
Yeah, Chinese.
That's like literally like all we get, right? And I feel like the ESEA community, and until very, very recently, has always been very like isolated. I feel like isolation and like fragmentation is sort of like kind of like some of the main like markers of like ESEA existence in this country, where it's just like pockets of communities scattered across the country, rather than being a sort of like cohesive thing. I feel like places like ESEA Music have done a really good job of like galvanizing communities together, and giving us these spaces and these opportunities to actually move forward as a community.
One of the key challenges we keep seeing coming up is that the lack of funding and support for ESEA creators. Like PRS has the PRS Foundation and funds here to support PRS members. The PRS foundations are the leading funders in the UK for creators. What are the most significant barriers creators face when trying to secure funding and resources?
There is just a lack of funding in the arts at the moment. So I think especially this year, I've experienced, like I've applied to every single fund that's ever come across my table, right? And the feedback I always get is your application is good enough to get to the panel stage. However, we just had so many great applicants that we cannot give you the funding. And it's always that, and it's like, it almost doesn't matter that I'm ESEA or not, in a sense. I think there's a general lack of funding. But then within that specific intersection, I don't think people understand that there is just like a discrepancy between opportunities that ESEA people get and non-ESEA people get, and we just don't get the same opportunities. So it is harder for me to prove myself and be making this amount of income before I get to apply for a fund. So there's so many other factors that I think are not taken account of.
As a manager, I am aware, like, you know, the lack of funding knowledge of like ESEA artists are aware of. It's quite like crucial for, you know, the industry networks should at least, like, I don't know, like having more panels about like, you know, fundings and all that kind of stuff. Like people are actually aware like these fundings exist. I got quite lucky this year to, you know, be selected as one of the MMF accelerator managers where, you know, throughout like the sessions and like conversations with other managers, I am aware like, you know, there's so many fundings I can apply for my artists. But even when I was doing like the fundings, I'm like, oh, they're asking like the ethnicity. I'm like, oh, you know, the gatekeeper is gonna think like, okay, cool, you know, are they Chinese? Are they like, you know, what, like, are they like? It's just like so many factors. I'm always just like, oh.
And also like like with any kind of funding, it's like, you know, it's like they consider it to be an investment, right? And I think with any kind of investment, people want a return on it.
Yeah.
And you know, if ESEA artists aren't seen as like a proven moneymaker and like seen as like profitable, then people are gonna be less willing to take that chance, right?
Absolutely.
It goes with anything to do, like anything industry related is like, ultimately, if we're not seen as profitable, if we're not seen as like a worthwhile investment, they're just going to be like less likely to want to be take an interest in us and take a risk on us. Well, a risk, yeah.
It's like the consequence of lack of representation is that you'll continue to have no representation.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you don't invest in the new generations coming up. What actionable steps can be taken by both the industry and the ESEA community to ensure better support, representation, and success for ESEA artists? I think people need to stop relying on what has worked before, and also at the same time start listening to the music.
Yeah,
and also
real.
like spending time with the talent and looking at what they have to offer musically. If you were a behind the scenes producer who was never in front of the camera and you made great pop music, people don't question your ethnicity. People just say you make great pop music. It's the second you take that helmet off, the mask off, and they're like, oh, you're Asian, I don't know if you'll make it. It's like,
Yeah, and it's also a thing when like I've done like a couple of interviews and I notice a difference in how I'm interviewed versus how like a white artist be interviewed.
Yep.
Or, and like a white artist, it would just all the questions just be about the music. What were your sonic influences here? Like, oh, the production on this track is quite interesting. Like, da da da. Like, whereas with me, it's like it's either about being ESEA or about being trans or something else to do with my identity. When honestly, like I would love to just do an interview, but all they do is like, oh. So like I noticed that Work Me Up had a footwork element. What is it about footwork music that appeals to you? Why can't it be that? Like, you know, and like but that's never what I get asked. Even though I think what I'm doing sonically is actually very interesting. That's the other thing as well. It's like you said, listening to the music, actually like hearing what it is that we're doing, not like separating it from us being ESEA because obviously like that is something that plays a part in music as well. But it's not just assuming that us being ESEA is like the be all and end all of why we make music and what defines our music. When really it's just one part of it.
yes. Like the amount of times I've had to send questions back and be like, you've not asked me a single question about my EP.
Yeah.
What was the point of this interview? Like I'm here to talk about music, so.
Focus on the music.
On the music, always.
Yeah, listen to the music.
That's the thing about the music industry. It feels like unlike being an artist making it sound nice, it feels like I'd say the bulk of what I do as an artist is things that have nothing to do with the music.
Yeah.
When
I
really
agree.
that should be the focus. And I feel like most artists can attest to that.
Yeah.
As well as say the same thing. So.
And like in the age of like, you know, digital streaming has been a big part of like music selling these days. I don't think there is a playlist on Spotify that kind of obviously directed to like Eastern Asian or ESEA artists like collective. You see like the best of like I don't know, like Latino, the best of, but there's no like the best of Asian or Eastern
There is
Asian.
Jasmine,
but
that's American
Jasmine. Yeah.
Asian artists. Right?
Yeah.
It's not very international in
Yeah.
that sense.
Because I remember when we had one of the ESEA meetings, I was kind of asking like, oh, is there like a Eastern Asian like playlist that's like obviously stating best of ESEA artists, and obviously it's great that we have Jasmine, but with people who aren't aware what Jasmine is, when they scroll through like the select, they'll be like, oh, what is Jasmine? But when they can see like, oh, best of like Latino, best of reggae or best of what, like, you know, there's no best of South Asian or East Asian or best of, like, it's, I think, you know, there should be a playlist like that.
Definitely.
You know?
Yeah. And also just like let ESEA artists get on like these other editorial playlists that are along genre lines. You know?
Yeah, and like festival,
Put us on more.
festival lineup and like, you know, like this events lineup, like, you know, recently we've seen a lot of like ESEA artists being booked, which is great. But then when it comes to like the mainstream like market, it's quite rare for like an Eastern Asian artist. Like obviously we see like Peggy Goo and we see like Yeji, we see like BF Doobie, but at the same time, like, you know, it is still not enough, I
I
think.
mean, it's like what be able to be Rina, Peggy Goo, Yeji. That's 4 people I can
Yeah.
think of, and like that's kind of it, really.
Also,
Exactly.
they're all women.
Yeah.
Yeah,
As well, keeping that in mind. There's something I think more.
Palatable.
I was gonna say, but
maybe.
like, not that these women aren't incredible and powerful, but like, I think the opportunities for kind of East and Southeast Asian women and the way they're perceived is different, and they fight through a lot of that misogyny and racism themselves to get to where they are. And I think the people who are supporting them is the ESEA community, but you don't see that kind of spread across the spectrum of gender at all.
There's also that element of like misogyny almost like playing a part in why these people, you know, because at the end, like the experience of being a woman is like being consumed, right, and being viewed and being, and I think there's this level of like objectification that goes into why you only really see ESEA women in these sort of like positions of, you know, being in the spotlight.
And it's also like
Much-
understanding the teams that some artists surround themselves with.
Yeah.
Like, it is rare to have ESEA managers and ESEA publicists and ESEA everything else in your team. A lot of times it's like a little white man propping up an Asian person, but playing the white man game. It's not as, you know, transparent as we think it is.
Yeah, and the thing is that like one of the reasons why I love having Travis as my manager is that there's so much that we get, there's so much stuff that like I just don't really need to explain to him.
Or
'Cause-
compromise.
Yeah. And you know, I feel like if I did have like a white manager, I feel like they'd probably be like, okay, yeah, so we're gonna do a video for Langway 2. We're gonna put you in a cheap house. We're gonna have you like, we're gonna have some like you're gonna have like little like buns in your hair.
Because that's their only reference.
Yeah,
to
you're gonna cosplay
culture.
Chun-Li for this.
That's already been done.
Yeah.
I guess actionable steps. Like one more thing about that is like, you know, for example, our publicist, Rebecca, she is also
ESEA.
ESEA, which I'm like really happy about because she fully understands like, you know, what we're trying to represent with our music, and you know, she's willing to, you know, fight for those, you know, publication, like fight for us, you know, landing like in articles in those publications, which I'm like, you know, really, really grateful for. And I feel like the industry definitely should, you know, recognize these people as well, because, you know, they are our link to, you know, get our foot in the industry, and obviously support like, you know, radio presenter and journalist and like, you know, publicist that, you know, is also from the ESEA background, I think.
Like, diversify your decision making. Like, don't be led just to stick with what you're comfortable with. If you see yourself doing the same thing over and over again within the industry, change it up. Like, listen to other things, go to other shows, like, give other people opportunities, even if you're taking a chance, because chances are you probably won't lose much out of it. Someone else is going to gain a lot from
Exactly.
it. So,
And that applies to both like people who like artists in a very sort of like audience facing roles, and also people behind the scenes. And in some cases having people behind the scenes who ESEA matters even more, because those are the ones that who are actually making the decisions.
yes.
And yeah, like again, it's just like I can't stress like I can't like double down on what you're saying, which is just about like trying new things and taking a risk on things, because that's how like good art gets made. That's how the culture gets pushed forward, and ultimately that should be what it's about.
Absolutely. And you cannot ignore the fact that ESEA culture is so prevalent in the world. It's just about like embracing it properly and giving it a chance to shine. Yeah.
Exactly.
And letting us do it on our own terms as well.
I mean, low-key, I really wanted to, you know, gain some more recognitions from the industry. You know, like I wanted to take on more ESEA artists, just because, you know, there will always be newcomer to the industry, no matter they're like young artists or like, you know, artists who has experience. There's still lots of information I need to passed on to these artists, give them a hand. You know, for example, like fundings. You know, not everyone is familiar with like the application of PPL Momentum Fund or PRS Foundation funds or early promoter career funds or FAC Step Up Fund with Amazon. There's always somebody that needed help, and I really wanted to like expand my team to an extent. Like I am also a label where I truly give the power to the artists, let them have their own voice. I wouldn't be like, oh, this song is quite controversial. I don't want you to you release it. Do your thing. You need to speak up. What's on your mind. Be more. Have more courage to release the hits, the bangers, because there will always be PR crisis. There will always be
Scandals.
But if the music bangs, it bangs.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
100%.